Lila loved weekends at her grandpa Robert's house. Every Saturday she would hop off the school bus and rush down the street, excitement bubbling in her chest. Robert's house was a small, cozy place with a garden that stretched across the front yard. Flowers of every color bloomed there, and little vegetable patches gave a sense of life and purpose. Lila always enjoyed helping her grandpa with the garden. She liked the smell of the fresh soil, the feel of the earth between her fingers, and the way her grandpa would tell stories about how each plant had a story of its own. Robert, in his 70s, was still full of energy. His hair had turned silver and his face bore the gentle lines of age, but his eyes sparkled with warmth and humor. He had spent his life as a mechanic and loved fixing things. Tools lined the garage walls, each in its proper place, and he took pride in teaching Lila how to handle them safely. Over the years, she had learned how to hammer a nail without bending it, tighten bolts, and even handle a small wrench with care. Their bond was simple but deep. Lila always felt safe and cherished when she was with him. On that particular Saturday, the air was crisp and the sun was shining bright. Lila helped Robert prune some roses while he told stories about the cars he had repaired and the people he had met over the years. They laughed often, sharing little jokes and memories. Everything seemed ordinary, peaceful, and calm. As the afternoon went on, Lila noticed something unusual. Across the street, a van had stopped and parked oddly. Its windows were tinted dark, making it impossible to see who was inside. Lila thought it was strange because she didn't remember anyone new moving into the neighborhood. She squinted, trying to see more details, and felt a small twinge of unease in her stomach. She mentioned it casually to her grandpa, who glanced at the van, shrugged, and returned to trimming the rose bushes. Robert was cautious, but he believed the neighborhood was quiet and safe. Minutes passed, and the van remained stationary. Then Lila noticed two men stepping out. They were tall, wearing dark clothes, and their faces were partially hidden. Their movements were deliberate, almost as if they were checking everything around them. Lila's heart began to race. She whispered to her grandpa that the men looked suspicious. Robert looked up, this time more seriously, and nodded, telling her to stay calm. He had a calmness about him that was reassuring, but underneath, Lila could sense a flicker of concern. The men started walking toward the house. Robert quickly walked inside and locked the doors, telling Lila to do the same. Lila's hands shook as she turned the key in the lock. Her mind raced with questions. Who were these men? What did they want? Could they hurt them? She wanted to call the police, but when she picked up the phone, there was no dial tone. She tried again and again, but it was dead. It seemed as if someone had cut the line. Fear crept in slowly, like a cold wind through a small crack in a door. Robert instructed Lila to go to the basement. It was small but secure. He had made sure it had an emergency key to the safe where he kept important items. Lila hurried down the steps, her heart pounding so loudly that it felt like the intruders might hear it. She crouched in the basement, holding the key tightly in her hand. She could hear muffled sounds from upstairs. The pounding on the front door, the footsteps moving around, the voices of the men demanding to be let in. Her imagination ran wild, picturing the worst-case scenarios. She felt frozen, unable to move or even breathe properly. From the basement window, Lila could see the men peering around the property, looking for another way in. She knew that if they found a way to break in, things could turn dangerous quickly. She kept whispering to herself that everything would be okay, trying to calm her racing mind, but fear had wrapped itself around her like a heavy blanket. Then, she noticed something that made her pause. A group of motorcycles appeared slowly at the end of the street. They weren't driving by, they had stopped. Their engines rumbled softly at first, then louder as they revved. Lila wasn't sure what to think. Were they friends or foes? She squinted to see the riders clearly, and her stomach flipped. They were bikers wearing leather jackets and patches on their vests. They were not part of the threat. At least they didn't seem to be. Their attention was entirely on Robert's house, and something in the way they watched made Lila feel a small spark of hope. Upstairs, Robert was doing his best to stay calm. He checked the locks, peered out the window, and tried to assess the situation. He realized that the men outside were persistent and determined. They kept trying to find a way in, looking over fences and checking windows. Robert's mind raced. He had faced danger before, but never like this, so close to home. He took a deep breath and tried to steady himself. Lila's safety was his priority, and he would do anything to protect her. The bikers, sensing trouble, started moving closer. They were careful but purposeful, circling around the street, keeping an eye on the intruders. Lila watched them, feeling a mixture of relief and wonder. She had never seen people act so decisively and bravely. It gave her courage to keep quiet and stay in the basement until she knew it was safe. The tension in the house was palpable. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound made Lila's heart leap. Robert kept whispering reassurances from the living room, telling her to stay calm and wait for the right moment. Lila gripped the key tightly, feeling a strange sense of readiness. She didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but she trusted her grandpa. He had always been a figure of strength in her life, and she knew he wouldn't let anything bad happen if he could help it. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the shadows in the yard grew longer. Lila's fear mixed with a strange sense of anticipation. Something was about to happen, she could feel it. The bikers were getting closer, their engines rumbling more insistently. She could see the intruders starting to get nervous, glancing at the bikers and adjusting their positions. For the first time since the men had appeared, Lila felt a spark of hope that someone might actually come to help them. She stayed in the basement, her eyes glued to the small window, watching the scene unfold. She could see her grandpa moving with quiet determination, checking the doors and windows, ready to defend his home. He looked calm, even though Lila knew he was carefully assessing every possible danger. She wished she could be braver, but her fear was overwhelming. Yet even in her fear, she felt a growing sense of trust in the unexpected arrival of the bikers. Minutes felt like hours as she observed. The intruders seemed uncertain now, their confidence shaken by the unexpected presence of the bikers. Lila's pulse quickened as she realized that help was on the way, even if it was unconventional help from people she had never met. She could see the bikers signaling to each other, communicating silently with gestures and glances, a coordinated plan forming before her eyes. Lila clutched the key tighter. She thought about her grandpa's stories of bravery and kindness, and she began to understand that courage could come from many places, sometimes from the most surprising people. Her fear was still there, but it was now mixed with awe and hope. She realized that no matter what happened next, they were not entirely alone. There were people willing to step in when others were in danger, even strangers. As the evening light faded, Lila stayed in the basement, keeping her eyes on the scene outside. Her grandpa's calm presence and the bikers' decisive actions gave her a sense of safety. She whispered a silent thank you, hoping that somehow her gratitude could reach them. She didn't know what the night would bring, but she knew that something extraordinary was unfolding right in front of her. The ordinary day had turned into a moment of tension, fear, and unexpected hope. Lila realized that sometimes, ordinary people could witness extraordinary courage, and sometimes, heroes arrived when least expected. From the basement, Lila could see everything clearly. The men who had approached her grandpa's house were pacing and looking around nervously now. They kept glancing at the motorcycles, their tinted windows reflecting the setting sun. The bikers didn't rush forward. They stayed just far enough to be seen clearly, their presence alone changing the energy in the street. Lila's heart raced, but she felt a flicker of hope. Someone was here to protect them, even if she didn't know exactly what they would do. Upstairs, Robert was working quickly but calmly. He locked the last window and double-checked the doors. He moved with precision, remembering every precaution he had learned during his years as a mechanic and a careful homeowner. He knew that staying calm and observing was more important than panicking. He also knew that time was his ally. He whispered to Lila to stay low, reminding her that help was on the way. Lila nodded silently, gripping the emergency key to the safe tightly, wishing she could do more. The intruders had started looking for alternative entry points. One moved toward the side door, testing the handle. Another peeked through a window, scanning the interior for valuables. They didn't notice the bikers at first, but slowly, one of the men's eyes caught the glint of the motorcycles across the street. His movement froze and he pointed toward the bikers. The other man followed his gaze and frowned. Their confidence seemed to waver. For the first time, Lila saw fear in their actions. The leader of the bikers, a tall man with a rugged face and calm eyes, revved his engine slightly, letting the sound echo down the quiet street. The rumble was low but powerful, signaling strength and alertness. Lila could feel it in her chest. The intruders shifted, whispering to each other, unsure whether to stay or flee. They hadn't expected anyone to intervene so directly. The bikers' boldness, their sheer presence, made them reconsider their actions. Lila felt her chest tighten with a mix of fear and anticipation. She knew that this confrontation, though not yet physical, had already changed the course of what could have been a terrifying night. Robert listened carefully from inside. He could hear the faint murmurs of the intruders, their voices low and tense. He knew they were beginning to panic, and he silently reminded himself to stay steady. He had learned over the years that people in distress often make mistakes, and he hoped these men would underestimate the biker's determination. He peeked briefly through the curtains, ensuring the intruders had not discovered another way into the house. Every movement, every observation mattered. Meanwhile, the bikers had not stayed still. They moved strategically along the street, making sure they were visible from all angles. Two of them walked toward the men near the van, their leather boots heavy on the pavement. They didn't approach aggressively. Instead, their steps were purposeful, confident, and intimidating. The men looked up, and a flash of uncertainty crossed their faces. The bikers' leader spoke calmly but firmly, warning them to leave immediately. The intruders muttered among themselves, clearly unsure of how to respond. Inside, Lila tried to stay silent. She could feel her heart pounding so loudly that it felt as if it would burst from her chest. She wanted to peek more closely but knew she had to trust her grandpa and the bikers. She squeezed the key in her hand, reminding herself that she had a role too, to remain safe until help fully arrived. Her breathing was shaky, but her mind began to focus. She observed the way the bikers moved, how they used small gestures to communicate, and she realized that they were experienced in handling dangerous situations. Their presence was not random. It was calculated and brave. The intruders started moving again, trying to approach the house from a different angle. One of them went toward the back gate, attempting to find a weak spot. As he moved, a biker quietly positioned himself near the fence, blocking the path without making a sudden move. The intruder froze and hesitated, sensing that something was wrong. His companion glanced at him and nodded nervously. They were no longer the confident aggressors. Their uncertainty grew with every moment. Robert kept checking the doors and windows. He knew that if the intruders tried to break in, the situation could become dangerous quickly. He adjusted the locks again, making sure everything was secure. He whispered reassuring words to Lila, telling her that they were almost safe and that the bikers were handling the situation. Lila felt a small wave of relief, though the fear still lingered. She understood now that danger could arrive suddenly, even on a calm, sunny afternoon. Across the street, the bikers began to take more assertive action. One of them walked up to the van, standing tall and blocking the exit. The intruders glanced at each other nervously, realizing that leaving was not going to be simple. The rumble of engines and the strong, silent presence of the bikers created an unspoken barrier. Lila watched in awe, realizing that bravery could take many forms. These people were strangers who had chosen to intervene, putting themselves at risk for the sake of her and her grandpa. The intruders hesitated further. They whispered urgently to each other, trying to decide their next move. Lila could almost hear the fear in their voices. They seemed to understand on some level that the bikers were not ordinary bystanders. Robert, keeping a watchful eye on the windows, noticed the change in the intruders' behavior. He felt a wave of gratitude and relief, knowing that the situation was shifting in their favor. The bikers' arrival had tilted the balance, and the intruders were beginning to realize that their plan was failing. Minutes passed slowly, with tension thick in the air. The intruders seemed trapped, unsure whether to stay or flee. The bikers maintained their positions, calm but alert, ready to act if necessary. Lila stayed in the basement, watching and waiting. She realized that courage could be contagious. Seeing the bikers act boldly gave her strength, helping her manage her own fear. She clutched the key tightly, feeling a sense of responsibility and hope. Finally, the intruders made a sudden decision. They backed away from the house, glancing at the bikers and then at each other. Their expressions showed frustration and fear. They quickly returned to their van, trying to start the engine and drive away. But the bikers had anticipated this. One of them stepped forward, revving his motorcycle loudly, creating a sudden, intimidating noise that made the intruders flinch. Another biker positioned his bike near the driveway, blocking a clear escape path. The intruders struggled briefly, then realized they had no choice but to leave. And they sped down the street, their tires squealing as they disappeared into the distance. Lila felt a rush of relief so strong that it made her knees weak. She remained in the basement for a few moments, letting the adrenaline subside. Robert came down the stairs and hugged her tightly, whispering that everything was okay now. Tears of relief streamed down Lila's face. She felt a deep sense of gratitude toward the bikers, who had risked their own safety to protect them. She understood that bravery sometimes comes from unexpected places, and that ordinary people could become heroes in extraordinary moments. The street returned to a quiet calm, but the impact of what had just happened lingered. Lila realized that life could change in an instant, and that courage, kindness, and quick thinking could make all the difference. She and her grandpa talked quietly, reflecting on the events and the strangers who had saved them. Robert explained that sometimes help comes from people who don't fit the usual idea of a hero, and that the bikers' actions were a perfect example. That night, Lila lay in bed thinking about the events of the afternoon. She replayed every detail: the intruder's fear, the biker's presence, her grandpa's calmness, and her own growing understanding of courage. She realized that danger could come unexpectedly, but so could help. She felt a stronger connection to her grandpa, and a newfound respect for the people who stepped in to protect others. The experience left a lasting impression on her, teaching lessons she would carry for the rest of her life. The sound of engines and the roar of the motorcycles filled the quiet neighborhood street. The intruders had realized that they were outmatched, but their panic made them reckless. They tried to restart their van and drive off, but the bikers had anticipated every move. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped into the street, revving his motorcycle directly in front of the van. The sudden noise and movement startled the intruders, causing them to slam the brakes and yell at each other. The other bikers flanked the van from both sides, creating an invisible barrier. Lila, hiding in the basement, could barely believe what she was seeing. She had never imagined strangers could act with such courage and precision. Her chest felt tight, her pulse pounding as she watched every movement, feeling a mix of fear and awe. Robert had stepped back slightly from the windows, keeping a careful eye on the intruders. He felt a surge of relief seeing the bikers' fearless actions. His mind raced with thoughts of gratitude and disbelief. How could these people know exactly what to do and how quickly? He whispered softly to himself, reminding himself to remain calm. Every second counted, and he knew that if the intruders tried anything, the bikers would be ready. The intruders, realizing that they couldn't escape easily, began to argue. Their voices were harsh, tense, and full of panic. They debated whether to leave or attempt to force their way inside another way. Lila could hear every word, and each sentence made her shiver. The fear in their voices contrasted sharply with the calm determination of the bikers. It was a stark reminder of how courage could stand against fear and change the outcome of a dangerous situation. One of the bikers, with a calm but firm voice, shouted at the intruders, warning them to leave immediately and not to come back. The intruders hesitated, unsure if they should obey or continue with their plan. The leader of the bikers, standing tall beside his motorcycle, gave a subtle signal to the others. Instantly, the group moved with synchronized precision, surrounding the van and cutting off any chance of escape. Lila's heart raced as she watched the scene unfold. She felt a strange mixture of hope, fear, and admiration for the people who had come to help them. Robert felt his chest tighten with relief. He knew that the intruder's confidence had crumbled, and he could finally allow himself to breathe a little easier. He glanced at Lila, who was peeking through the small basement window. He smiled reassuringly and whispered that everything was going to be all right. Lila nodded, feeling her fear begin to ebb as she watched the bikers maintain their positions, careful but ready for any sudden movement. Their presence alone had created a buffer of safety around the house. The intruders decided to try the side gate, hoping to find another way into the backyard. One of the bikers had anticipated this move and quietly positioned his motorcycle near the gate, effectively blocking the path. The intruder froze, unsure how to proceed. The other bikers adjusted their positions slightly, maintaining a strategic formation that left the intruders trapped in place. Lila watched with wide eyes, amazed at the coordination and bravery displayed before her. She realized that true courage often came from action, not words, and that these bikers were proving it in a way that could change lives in a single moment. Tension filled the street as the intruders assessed their options. Their confidence had disappeared, replaced with fear and uncertainty. Lila could hear their whispers, their hurried discussions, and the sound of the van's engine struggling to start. The bikers stayed calm, using their presence and quiet authority to control the situation without violence. Lila felt her heart beat slower as she realized the intruders were losing control, and the bikers were gradually taking command of the scene. Suddenly, one of the intruders tried to force the van forward, attempting to push past the motorcycle blocking the driveway. The biker reacted immediately, positioning himself directly in front of the vehicle, revving the engine to create an intimidating roar. The intruder slammed on the brakes, shouting at his partner in frustration. The other bikers moved closer, maintaining their formation and preventing any chance of escape. Lila's heart raced, but she also felt a deep sense of awe at the bravery and quick thinking of these strangers. Robert, watching the situation from inside, felt a surge of gratitude. He had seen many situations in his life where danger could overwhelm, but he had never witnessed a response like this. The bikers were fearless, methodical, and committed to ensuring that no harm came to him or Lila. He whispered softly, telling himself that people could be truly remarkable when faced with the choice to act courageously. Lila listened, her own fear slowly giving way to admiration for the people who had arrived in their time of need. The intruders, realizing that they had no way out, finally made a decision. They backed away from the house, muttering angrily and frantically, starting the van. One of the bikers moved slightly, ensuring that the van's path was still blocked. The intruders hesitated, then made a last-ditch attempt to escape by driving recklessly down the street. The bikers did not pursue. Their goal had been achieved. The immediate threat to Robert and Lila was gone. Lila let out a quiet sigh, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. As the van disappeared around the corner, the bikers slowly relaxed their positions. They remained alert but allowed the tension in the street to ease. Lila and Robert finally stepped outside cautiously, their eyes scanning the street for any remaining threat. They saw the bikers standing together, calm and composed, their presence still commanding respect. Lila felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She ran toward them, tears of relief streaming down her face, and hugged the nearest biker. He smiled gently, patting her shoulder and reassuring her that everything was okay now. Robert approached the bikers, offering heartfelt thanks. He explained how much their intervention had meant and how they had prevented a situation that could have been disastrous. The bikers accepted the gratitude with quiet humility, emphasizing that they had only done what anyone should do when they saw someone in danger. Lila watched this exchange, feeling inspired by the idea that ordinary people could step into extraordinary roles when others needed them most. The street gradually returned to its normal, quiet rhythm. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to emerge from their homes, curious and concerned. They saw the bikers and Robert and Lila together, and slowly the story of bravery and intervention spread. People expressed their relief and admiration for the bikers, recognizing the courage it took to confront danger without hesitation. Lila listened to the whispers and smiles of her neighbors, feeling proud and inspired by what had just occurred. That night, Lila lay in bed thinking about the events of the afternoon. She reflected on the fear she had felt, the bravery of the bikers, and the calmness of her grandpa. She understood that courage could take many forms, sometimes quiet, sometimes loud, but always meaningful. She felt a newfound respect for people who acted selflessly, putting others before themselves. The incident had changed her perspective, showing her that heroes could appear in unexpected ways and that bravery was sometimes just being willing to act when it mattered most. Robert sat quietly in the living room, reflecting on what had happened. He felt immense gratitude for the bikers and a renewed sense of the importance of community. The neighborhood, once calm and uneventful, had witnessed an extraordinary act of courage. Robert understood that these moments, rare as they might be, were what made life remarkable. Lila, listening from her room, felt a strong bond with her grandpa, a deeper understanding of human kindness, and the knowledge that fear could be overcome with courage and quick thinking. The events of the day left a lasting impression on Lila. She realized that danger could appear unexpectedly, but so could help. She thought about the bikers and the way they had acted without hesitation, risking themselves for strangers. She understood that courage was not about being fearless. It was about facing fear to protect others. She fell asleep that night with a sense of gratitude and awe, knowing that her grandpa was safe and that extraordinary people could appear when they were needed most. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft twilight over the quiet neighborhood. The street was calm again, but the sense of relief was tempered with lingering tension. Lila and her grandpa Robert had finally stepped outside, their hearts still racing, but the immediate threat was gone. The bikers stood together near their motorcycles, a reassuring presence that had become a symbol of safety in that intense afternoon. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she turned to Robert, feeling the reality of what had just happened. She had been terrified, but now the shock was giving way to gratitude and awe. The distant sound of police sirens began to echo down the street. Someone must have called them after the intruders fled. Lila's stomach tightened as she realized that the events were far from over. Robert nodded to her quietly, reassuring her that everything would be all right, that the bikers had done their part, and now the authorities would take over. Lila stayed close to her grandpa, her eyes scanning the street as police cars arrived and officers stepped out. Their faces alert and professional. The bikers approached the officers calmly, explaining what had happened, pointing out the direction in which the intruders had fled, and describing their appearance. The police listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. Lila observed everything, noticing the contrast between the officers' methodical approach and the bikers' instinctive courage. Both were necessary in their own way, and she felt a deep respect for each of them. Neighbors began to come out of their homes, drawn by curiosity and concern. They exchanged whispers, glances, and nods, realizing that something unusual had occurred. Some had seen parts of the confrontation from their windows or while walking their dogs. As they gathered, murmurs of admiration and surprise spread through the group. The bikers, who had initially seemed intimidating, were now being praised for their bravery. Lila felt a swell of pride for the people who had come to their aid when they were most needed. Robert spoke with the police, recounting the events in detail. He described the men, their actions, and how the bikers had intervened. The officers nodded, acknowledging the importance of the bikers' timely arrival. They reassured Robert and Lila that patrols would be increased in the area and that they would investigate the incident thoroughly. Lila watched her grandpa, seeing the combination of relief and lingering concern in his eyes. He was safe, but he knew the danger could return if precautions weren't taken. This balance between caution and gratitude seemed to define his response. As the officers took their notes, they asked if Robert and Lila had been harmed, or if anything had been stolen. Robert shook his head, explaining that the bikers had arrived just in time to prevent any harm. Lila added her own account, describing the fear she had felt in the basement and how the bikers' presence had given her hope. The officers listened patiently, their expressions serious but empathetic. Lila realized that courage was not always about physical strength. Sometimes it was about being willing to help, to protect, and to act without hesitation. The bikers, meanwhile, were being thanked repeatedly by neighbors. Some offered drinks, others shook their hands, and a few even expressed a desire to join them for a ride inspired by their bravery. Lila approached one of the bikers and hugged him, whispering a heartfelt thank you. He smiled gently, patting her shoulder, and reassured her that they were glad they could help. Lila felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or adrenaline. It was the warmth of gratitude and the knowledge that selflessness existed in the world. Robert turned to the bikers, expressing his deep appreciation. He explained how much their quick thinking and bravery had meant to him and Lila. He spoke about the lessons he hoped Lila would learn from this experience, about courage, about kindness, and about the unexpected ways in which people could become heroes. The bikers accepted his words with humility, emphasizing that anyone could act when they saw someone in danger. Lila listened intently, absorbing the wisdom and the sense of community that had formed in such a short time. The police continued their work, walking the street, examining footprints, and noting the positions of the vehicles. They spoke to neighbors individually, gathering any additional information. Lila and Robert observed quietly, impressed by the thoroughness and professionalism of the officers. They realized that both instinctive courage and structured authority were essential in maintaining safety and order. The contrast made the afternoon feel like a lesson in human capability and teamwork, a lesson that Lila would carry with her for years to come. As the night deepened, the neighborhood began to settle back into its usual calm. Porch lights glowed warmly, and the sounds of everyday life resumed. Lila and Robert returned to the house, the bikers staying outside for a few more moments to ensure the intruders were truly gone. Lila watched them, feeling a mix of admiration and longing. She had never seen such bravery, and it inspired her in a way she could not yet fully articulate. She realized that courage, once witnessed, had a way of lingering in the mind and heart. Inside the house, Robert made tea for Lila. They sat together quietly, sipping the warm beverage and reflecting on the events. Lila spoke softly about her feelings, describing the fear, the relief, and the awe she had experienced. Robert listened, nodding and gently guiding the conversation toward understanding. He explained that fear was natural, but it could be overcome through preparation, calm thinking, and the support of others. Lila nodded, feeling a sense of wisdom settling over her that she had not anticipated when the day began. The bikers eventually departed, waving to Lila and Robert, their motorcycles disappearing into the distance. Lila felt a pang of sadness mixed with gratitude. She knew that their presence had been temporary, but their impact was lasting. Robert reassured her that the bikers' actions would always be remembered, not just by them, but by the neighborhood as well. The story of the afternoon would spread, inspiring others to act with courage when needed. As they prepared for bed, Lila and Robert talked about the importance of community. They discussed how people could come together, sometimes unexpectedly, to protect and support one another. Lila felt a deep sense of connection to the world around her, understanding that acts of bravery and kindness could come from strangers and neighbors alike. She realized that safety was not just about locks and alarms, but about people willing to stand up when it mattered most. Lila lay in bed that night, replaying the events in her mind. She thought about the intruders, the bikers, the police, and her grandpa's calm presence. She felt a mixture of relief, admiration, and inspiration. The day had started like any other, peaceful and ordinary, but it had turned into a powerful lesson in courage, community, and human kindness. Lila drifted off to sleep with a sense of gratitude, knowing that even in moments of fear and danger, people could rise to extraordinary acts of heroism and compassion. She understood that these lessons would stay with her, shaping the way she viewed the world and the people in it. The morning after the incident, the neighborhood felt different. The sun rose softly over the quiet street, casting a warm glow on houses and gardens. Lila sat on the front porch with her grandpa Robert, sipping hot chocolate and watching birds flit through the trees. Despite the calm, she couldn't shake the vivid memories of the previous day. The fear, the suspense, the sudden rush of hope when the bikers arrived, all of it was still fresh in her mind. Yet alongside those memories was a profound sense of gratitude and awe for the people who had stepped in to protect them. Robert placed a hand gently on Lila's shoulder. He could see the mixture of lingering fear and admiration in her eyes. He explained how important it was to remember not just the fear, but also the courage they had witnessed. He spoke about bravery in ordinary people, about how it could appear unexpectedly and how it could change outcomes in profound ways. Lila listened carefully, nodding. She realized that courage wasn't always in big gestures or grand speeches. Sometimes it was in the quiet, decisive actions of people willing to step forward in moments of danger. As they spoke, neighbors began to come out of their homes. The news of the bikers' intervention had spread quickly. People exchanged smiles, shook hands, and offered reassurances. Some shared their own small stories of moments when someone had unexpectedly helped them, creating a sense of community strengthened by shared experience. Lila felt a warm glow of connection as she realized that these moments of courage didn't just protect individuals, they rippled through the community, inspiring others and fostering trust. The bikers returned briefly to check on Robert and Lila. They parked their motorcycles down the street, smiling as they approached. Lila ran to greet them, feeling an overwhelming surge of gratitude. She hugged one of the bikers, her small hands gripping tightly as she whispered thanks. The biker smiled and ruffled her hair gently, assuring her that seeing them safe was all that mattered. Robert thanked them again, speaking sincerely about how their actions had prevented potential harm and how much their bravery meant to him and Lila. The bikers accepted the gratitude humbly, emphasizing that they had only done what they hoped anyone else would do in a similar situation. After the bikers left, Robert and Lila began assessing what changes they could make to feel safer. Robert explained that while the situation had been frightening, it was also a reminder of the importance of preparedness. They discussed updating the home's security, keeping emergency contacts handy and practicing how to respond calmly if danger ever returned. Lila absorbed these lessons, realizing that preparation wasn't about fear, but about empowerment. Knowing what to do in a crisis gave her confidence and a sense of control. Throughout the day, Lila reflected on what she had learned. She thought about the intruders and the fear they had created, and she contrasted that with the courage of the bikers and the calm wisdom of her grandpa. She realized that human behavior was complex, capable of both harm and extraordinary kindness. Her perspective expanded, and she understood that the world was full of unexpected moments, both frightening and inspiring. Courage could be found in strangers, in family, and in the quiet decisions people made when faced with uncertainty. Later, Lila and Robert visited neighbors who had witnessed parts of the event. They shared their experiences, listened to others, and expressed gratitude for the community's concern. The conversation reinforced the idea that safety and support were collective efforts. Lila noticed how even simple gestures, a neighbor checking in, a friendly wave, a shared story, contributed to a sense of security and belonging. She felt proud to be part of a community where people cared enough to act when needed. That evening, Lila journaled about the events. She wrote about her fear, the suspense, the bikers' bravery, and her grandpa's calm guidance. She described how the incident had shifted her understanding of courage and human kindness. Writing allowed her to process the emotions she had experienced and to reflect on the lessons she would carry forward. She realized that while fear was natural, it could coexist with hope, trust, and admiration for the people around her. Robert joined her as she finished writing, offering gentle words of reassurance. He explained that life was full of unexpected challenges, but it was also full of people willing to step forward and help. He encouraged her to remember the courage she had witnessed and to let it guide her in future situations. Lila felt a deep sense of peace as she listened, understanding that true strength often came from both personal preparedness and the support of others. In the days that followed, Lila and Robert continued to notice the subtle changes in their neighborhood. People greeted each other more warmly. Conversations included shared reflections on the event, and there was a sense of collective resilience. Lila observed how one act of bravery could inspire many others, creating ripples of courage and kindness. She felt connected to her community in a way she hadn't before, understanding that safety and support were not just individual responsibilities but shared commitments. Lila also took time to reflect personally on what courage meant. She realized it wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. The bikers' fearless intervention had shown her that bravery could appear in ordinary people, and that sometimes heroes came in unexpected forms. She felt inspired to emulate that courage in her own life in small ways, standing up for someone, helping a friend, or simply being aware of others' needs. Robert noticed the changes in Lila and smiled. He saw her growing understanding of empathy, bravery, and community. He knew that the lessons of the previous day would stay with her for life. Together, they reflected on the value of human connection, the importance of preparedness, and the profound impact of timely, courageous actions. Lila felt a sense of purpose and understanding, realizing that even in ordinary days, extraordinary moments could shape who she was becoming. As the sun set on the fifth day, Lila and Robert sat quietly on the porch once more. The world felt calmer, brighter, and full of possibility. Lila thought about the bikers, the intruders, the police, and her grandpa's unwavering calm. She understood that courage and kindness were powerful forces, capable of transforming fear into hope, danger into safety, and strangers into heroes. She felt a deep gratitude for the lessons she had learned, and for the people who had shown her the true meaning of bravery and compassion. That night, as Lila drifted off to sleep, she carried with her a renewed sense of hope and understanding. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but she also knew that courage, preparation, and human kindness would always be there to guide her. The experience had changed her, taught her, and inspired her in ways that would remain with her forever. She slept with a heart full of gratitude, peace, and the quiet knowledge that extraordinary acts of bravery could appear when they were needed most, leaving a lasting impact on those who witnessed them. Even though the immediate danger had passed, Lila felt a lingering sense of curiosity and reflection the morning after the bikers had left. She walked with her grandpa Robert through the garden, noticing the small details she had never paid attention to before. The dew on the flowers, the patterns in the leaves, the quiet chirping of birds. It was as if the world had slowed down, giving her time to process what had happened. The events of the previous day had left a deep mark on her, not one of fear now, but one of understanding, gratitude, and awareness of human courage. Robert smiled as he noticed Lila pausing to examine a tiny sprout in the soil. He encouraged her to take notice of the small things, explaining that life was made up of both ordinary moments and extraordinary events. Lila nodded thoughtfully. She realized that the afternoon had shown her both, the ordinary calm of a sunny day and the extraordinary bravery of the bikers who had protected them. Each moment, she understood, had its own value, whether filled with peace or tension. Throughout the neighborhood, people began to speak about the events. Conversations mentioned the bikers and their bravery, and there were stories shared about how the intruders had fled. Lila overheard neighbors discussing how ordinary people could act in extraordinary ways, and it gave her a sense of pride in her community. It was a comforting thought that courage and kindness were not limited to heroes in books or films. They existed in the real world, sometimes arriving in unexpected forms. Later that day, Robert took Lila to a small local cafe. They sat together, sipping tea, and he asked her how she felt now that everything had settled. Lila thought carefully, recalling the fear she had felt in the basement, the relief when the bikers arrived, and the gratitude she had experienced afterward. She realized that these emotions were all part of understanding human life, the danger, the bravery, and the community support. Robert nodded, pleased with her reflections, and reminded her that life often provided lessons through experiences, and it was important to pay attention and grow from them. While at the cafe, Lila noticed other patrons watching the news on a small television. The local station had picked up the story, showing footage of the street and recounting the events of the previous day. Lila and Robert watched as reporters described the bikers' intervention and the gratitude of the family and neighbors. Lila felt a surge of pride for the bikers who had acted without hesitation, knowing that their bravery was being recognized beyond just the neighborhood. She realized that sometimes courage was not only about action, but also about inspiring others to believe in goodness and humanity. After leaving the cafe, Lila and Robert returned home. Lila decided to organize the garden with more care, turning her attention to something peaceful and productive. As she worked, she thought about how fear could motivate people to act recklessly, but courage could inspire thoughtful action and protection. She reflected on how quickly situations could change, and how important it was to remain aware and prepared, not in a fearful way, but in a way that allowed her to respond effectively when needed. That afternoon, Lila and Robert received a visit from some of the bikers. They had returned to check on the family to make sure everything was all right. Lila ran to greet them, her heart filling with gratitude. The bikers smiled warmly, sharing light conversation and gentle laughter. They didn't speak of their actions as heroic. Instead, they talked about ordinary life, about work, families, and hobbies. Yet their presence was a reminder of bravery and kindness. Lila realized that real heroes often didn't seek recognition. They acted out of instinct and care for others. During their conversation, one of the bikers shared a story about another time he had helped someone in danger, emphasizing that helping others was a choice everyone could make. Lila listened intently, inspired by the stories, feeling that bravery wasn't limited to extraordinary situations but could also be expressed in daily life. Robert smiled at Lila's attentive expression, pleased that she was learning the deeper lesson, that courage and kindness were not always dramatic, but consistent, intentional acts that made a difference. As evening approached, Lila and Robert sat on the porch reflecting on the events. Lila thought about the intruders, the fear she had felt, and the sense of safety that the bikers' presence had created. She realized that fear could be overwhelming, but it could also heighten awareness and appreciation for acts of courage. She felt grateful for her grandpa who had stayed calm and guided her, and for the bikers who had shown her that bravery could appear in unexpected forms. The reflection brought her a sense of peace and understanding. That night, Lila journaled again, writing about everything she had experienced and learned. She captured the fear, the suspense, the relief, and the awe she had felt. She described how observing courage and kindness had changed her perspective on human behavior and on life itself. Writing helped her process the emotions, turning them into lessons she could carry forward. Lila understood that each moment, whether filled with danger or calm, had significance, and that human actions could have lasting impacts on others. Robert joined her after she finished writing, praising her reflections. He explained that life would continue to offer challenges, and that the best response was often to remain calm, observant, and willing to act when necessary. Lila felt a deep sense of reassurance from her grandpa's words, understanding that preparation, courage, and kindness could work together to protect and guide people through difficult times. She realized that this combination was a powerful force, capable of transforming fear into hope and danger into safety. In the following days, Lila noticed subtle changes in herself. She felt more confident in facing small challenges, more aware of the people around her, and more appreciative of acts of kindness, no matter how small. She also developed a stronger bond with her grandpa, valuing the lessons he shared and the calm guidance he provided. The experience had given her a broader understanding of life, showing her that extraordinary moments could emerge even in ordinary days. The neighborhood remained peaceful, but the story of the bikers' intervention became part of local lore. Lila heard neighbors recount the event, praising the bikers' bravery and discussing the importance of community vigilance and support. She realized that one act of courage could ripple outward, influencing many people and strengthening the sense of community. It reinforced her belief in human kindness and bravery, showing her that even strangers could become heroes in critical moments. As weeks passed, Lila continued her daily routines, but she carried the lessons of that day with her. She approached challenges with a newfound awareness, appreciated the small acts of kindness she witnessed, and reflected on the value of courage and preparedness. She also shared her experiences with friends and classmates, emphasizing the importance of looking out for others, staying calm in emergencies, and acting with bravery when needed. Lila understood that courage wasn't only for dramatic moments. It could be expressed in everyday life in countless meaningful ways. One evening, Lila and Robert sat together quietly in the garden, the sky painted with shades of orange and pink from the setting sun. They spoke about the bikers, the intruders, the police, and the neighbors. Lila expressed her gratitude and awe, and Robert nodded in agreement, proud of how she had processed and learned from the experience. They reflected on human nature, realizing that life was a balance of fear and courage, danger and safety, ordinary moments and extraordinary actions. Lila felt a deep sense of understanding, knowing that she had witnessed true bravery and learned lessons she would carry for the rest of her life. That night, as Lila went to bed, she felt a sense of calm and peace. She understood that danger could appear unexpectedly, but so could courage, kindness, and support. She drifted off to sleep with gratitude in her heart, for her grandpa, for the bikers, for her community, and for the lessons she had learned. She knew that these experiences would shape her perspective forever, reminding her that even in the face of fear, human courage and kindness could shine brightly, leaving a lasting impact on those who witnessed it.